Our government textbooks tell us that nobody in the ancient world had ever crossed the Atlantic before Columbus, but the voyage of the Mayflower only took 60 days. Are we honestly to believe that no one had ever previously taken the 60-day trip in all of human history? The great civilizations of ancient Egypt, Babylon, Sumer, Greece, Rome, and the seafaring Phoenicians never wondered what was out west past 59 days sailing? If we accept this improbability, we have to accept many more along with it, because the Native American cultures of the New World and the Eurasian cultures of the Old World were already far too similar to have naturally evolved separately. For instance, compare the Peruvians and Egyptians. The number of complex comparisons between the two peoples far surpasses serendipity. Both cultures believed in an immaterial soul which reincarnates through multiple physical existences. They both worshipped the sun, moon, and stars, and held amazing astronomical knowledge, much of which has just recently been rediscovered. Both peoples built amazing stone pyramids, often containing boulders too heavy for modern cranes to lift, quarried from miles away. Both cultures embalmed and mummified their dead. Peruvian and Egyptian royalty both wrapped children's heads in the practice of skull elongation, like trepanning, to attain higher consciousness. They both divided the year into 12 months. Both peoples had a women's order of Vestal virgins vowed to celibacy, and violating their vows was punished on both continents by being buried alive. Both cultures offered animal sacrifices and divined the future by examining the animal's entrails. They both built huge arches and strewed the road with flowers for returning home triumphant warriors. At the beginning of each agricultural season, during a big celebration, the kings placed their hands to the plow and plowed the first furrow. Are we to believe such incredibly specific practices developed completely independent of one another? Ignatius Donnelly wrote, "When the Spanish missionaries first set foot upon the soil of America in the 15th century, they were amazed to find the cross was as devoutly worshipped by the Red Indians as by themselves. Ancient symbols like the cross and the swastika already existed in the Americas long before the Europeans came. Egyptian symbols like the Ekeru, back-to-back lion gods hieroglyph are found in Olmec temples from ancient Mexico. We have also found Mayan art and glyphs in Egypt. Modern Mayans and tribal Egyptians both recognize the languages found in their countries as that of their ancestors, and both can read much of it. We've discovered artwork 2,000 to 3,000 years old, clearly depicting Negroes and Caucasians in Central America. The establishment remains silent on all these issues. The similarities between Old World European and American peoples are vast and difficult to accept as mere coincidence. The use of cement, bricks, arches, and advanced masonry and architecture is found on both sides of the Atlantic, as well as roads, stone and suspension bridges, metallurgy, ore mining of copper, tin, bronze, gold, silver, and iron, sculpture, painting, engraving, agriculture, navigation, large sailing vessels, pottery, glasswork, and music. Both Old and New Worlders fashioned the same weapons like bows and arrows, spears, swords, battle axes, darts, and slings. Baptism, confession, penance, all long existed on both continents. Ignatius Donnelly wrote, "If we find on both sides of the Atlantic precisely the same arts, sciences, religious beliefs, habits, customs, and traditions, it is absurd to say that the peoples of the two continents arrived separately, by precisely the same steps, at precisely the same ends. When we consider the resemblance of the civilizations of the Mediterranean nations to one another, no man is silly enough to pretend that Rome, Greece, Egypt, Assyria, Phoenicia, each spontaneously and separately invented the arts, sciences, habits, and opinions in which they agreed. but we proceed to trace out the thread of descent or connection from one to another. Why should a rule of interpretation prevail as between the two sides of the Atlantic, different from that which holds good as to the two sides of the Mediterranean Sea? If, in the one case, similarity of origin has unquestionably produced similarity of arts, customs, and condition, why, in the other, should not similarity of arts, customs, and condition prove similarity of origin? Is there any instance in the world of two peoples, without knowledge of or intercourse with each other, happening upon the same invention, whether that invention be an arrowhead or a steam engine? If it required of mankind a lapse of at least 6,000 years before it began anew the work of invention, and took up the thread of original thought where Atlantis dropped it, what probability is there of 3 or 4 separate nations all advancing at the same speed to precisely the same arts and opinions? The proposition is untenable. If, then, we prove that on both sides of the Atlantic civilizations were found substantially identical, we have demonstrated that they must have descended one from the other, or have radiated from some common source. Stubborn Egyptologists, anthropologists, and our government textbooks also claim that the ancient Egyptian, Sumerian, and Babylonian cultures all somehow started at the height of their civilization, and rapidly devolved as their empires fell. This is standard accepted fact, but how is it possible that such advanced cultures just magically appeared at the beginning of recorded history? James Arthur wrote, "The region of Mesopotamia, which seems to have suddenly appeared out of nowhere, according to academia, had a high knowledge of astronomy, architecture, a pantheon of gods, agriculture, gourmet foods, and courts. It is considered to be the cradle of civilization. Mesopotamia, in the north, encompassed the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, which flowed from the Garden of Eden in the Genesis stories. The places known as Atlantis, Dilmun, and Lemuria are mentioned in the records of Sumeria. This is an obvious indication that these societies or cities predated the Sumerian era. Therefore, the Mesopotamian civilization did not suddenly appear out of nowhere. It was more likely a relocated, ancient, lost civilization." Stephen Meller said, "One of the great mysteries that Egyptologists can never explain is this devolution, this retrograde. You look at the Old Kingdom, the pyramids, the type of hieroglyphs, the type of jewelry, the type of art produced, and then as it goes forward to the Middle Kingdom, it devolves. It's less advanced. To the New Kingdom, when they didn't even build in granite or limestone anymore, but in sandstone, a much softer stone, easier to work with. Are we honestly to believe that advanced mathematics, medicine, astronomy, architecture, art, writing, and a complex spirituality were already fully developed from the very beginning of human civilization?" John Anthony West wrote, "How does a complex civilization spring full-blown into being? Look at a 1905 automobile and compare it to a modern one. There is no mistaking the process of development. But in Egypt, there are no parallels. Everything is right there at the start." Commons Beaumont wrote, "The ancient civilization of the land we call Egypt has been pronounced by archaeologists as flawless of its type from the very first. It reveals none of the painful steps from primeval beginnings passing through the Paleolithic, Neolithic, and Bronze Age to that of iron. It apparently burst upon the scene into exotic radiance, its perfected civilization accordingly having been described as a miracle. Science cannot admit any such miracle, and another explanation must be forthcoming." And Michael Tessarian wrote, "What we call Egypt lasted longer than the later Hellenic, Roman, Byzantine, medieval, Renaissance, Enlightenment, industrial, and modern ages put together and multiplied by 3. The manipulators of history, therefore, purposely concentrate our attention on the latter days in order to prevent us delving back into Egypt's past. They do so understandably, for they have everything to lose, once humankind becomes reintroduced to the archive of knowledge and wisdom that was common to our ancestors. Today, there are hundreds of pyramids still standing all over the world from India to Peru, cultures separated by the Atlantic who supposedly never discovered each other's existence, built these giant triangular structures, aligned them to cardinal directions, encoded within them sacred geometry and mathematics, and used them as a sepulchre. Acharya S. wrote, "As Keel says in Disneyland of the Gods, we know that pyramid building was once a universal practice throughout the world. Over 6,000 years ago, unknown peoples were assembling great pyramids in Mexico. Gigantic man-made mounds were constructed in China, Great Britain, North America, and on remote Pacific islands, while the Egyptians were still living in mud huts along the Nile. During World War II, pilots flying the Hump reported seeing one or more massive pyramids standing silently in isolated Himalaya valleys. Of the ubiquitousness and similarity of pyramids, David Hatcher Childress states, Mayan pyramids are found from Central America to as far away as the Indonesian island of Java. The pyramid of Suka, on the slopes of Mount Lawu, near Surakarta, in central Java, is an amazing temple with stone stelae and a step pyramid that would match any in the jungles of Central America. The pyramid is in fact virtually identical to the pyramids found at the ancient Mayan site at Uaxactun near Tikal. In speaking of the global civilization, Keel elucidates the weaknesses of the current archaeological paradigm. All these things seem to be interrelated, as if they were once part of some great civilization, a common culture that spread throughout the world and then died. We have a reasonably complete history of the past 2,000 years, and a half-baked archaeological reconstruction of the past 5,000 years. But there are so many gaps in our knowledge that most of the popular archaeological theories really have very little merit. Indeed, we can't even be sure that the Egyptians built the Great Pyramid. In fact, the Great Pyramid is admittedly much more ancient than the Egyptians of history. As Hotema relates, when the most ancient Egyptians first saw the mysterious Sphinx and the Great Pyramid of Giza, only their tops projected above the wind-blown sand of the desert. They knew no more about the purpose of these structures, their builders, or when they were built, than we do. The Great Pyramids at Giza, even by today's standards, are absolute miracles in architecture, masonry and construction, mathematics and astronomy. The dimensions of the pyramids are extremely accurate, and the site was leveled to within a fraction of an inch over the entire base. This is comparable to the accuracy possible with modern construction and surveying methods and laser leveling. Alan Alford wrote, "Beneath the now removed outer layer, the pyramid's construction consists of approximately 2,500,000 dressed stones, mostly yellow limestone, but with harder granite for certain interior features. The total mass of the Great Pyramid is estimated at around 90 million cubic feet, which would weigh between 6 and 7 million tons. To put this into proper perspective, the highest cathedral nave in Europe would fit 3 times into its height, and its mass exceeds that of all the cathedrals, churches, and chapels built in England since the beginning of Christianity. The Great Pyramid is often cited as the largest building on Earth, with twice the volume and 30 times the mass of New York's famous Empire State Building. The pyramid rests on an artificially leveled platform which is less than 22 inches thick, yet is still almost perfectly level, with errors of less than an inch across its entire area, despite supporting such an enormous weight for thousands of years. The base of the pyramid is set out perfectly square, no mean feat of engineering in itself. Up until the last millennium, the pyramids were covered completely with smooth, polished limestone casing blocks. In other words, the pyramids were not an irregular-looking series of steps with a missing capstone like they are now. They were covered with 115,000 10-ton casing sheets of polished limestone, fitted so perfectly that a razor's edge couldn't get between the casings, less than 1/50th of an inch. The Egyptians wrote how it reflected the sun like a mirror on all sides. Today, there are still a few polished casings left over at the base of one side. Alan Alford wrote, "Our first example of 20th century engineering in the Giza pyramids is the 6-sided limestone casing blocks, which were polished and precision carved to fit perfectly with each other and the core stones, with joints measuring less than 1/50th of an inch. As if this was not incredible enough, all of these stones were found to be joined together with an extremely fine but strong cement, which had been applied evenly on semi-vertical faces across a surface expanse covering 21 acres on the Great Pyramid alone." The second example is the internal passages of the Great Pyramid. These passages have been measured countless times and found to be perfectly straight, with a deviation, in the case of the descending passage, of less than 1/50th of an inch along its masonry part. Over a length of 150 feet, that is incredible. If one includes the further 200 feet of passage bored through the solid rock, the error is less than 1/4 of an inch. Now this is engineering of the highest precision, comparable with 20th century technology, but supposedly achieved 4,500 years ago. Our third example is the machining of granite within the pyramids. One of the first archaeologists to carry out a thorough survey of the pyramid was Petrie, who was particularly struck by the granite coffer in the king's chamber. The precision with which the coffer had been carved out of a single block of extremely hard granite struck him as quite remarkable. Petrie estimated that diamond-tipped drills would need to have been applied with a pressure of 2 tons in order to hollow out the granite box. It was not a serious suggestion as to the method actually used, but simply his way of expressing the impossibility of creating that artifact using 19th century technology. It is still a difficult challenge even with 20th century technology, and yet we are supposed to believe that Khufu achieved this at a time when the Egyptians possessed only the most basic copper hand tools. Under the pyramids are large tunnels, hundreds of meters deep, drilled into limestone bedrock with almost perfect 90-degree angles. This kind of drilling technology has only existed, in our current paradigm, for under a century. So how were they drilling, chiseling, and lifting all these megalithic structures? In a famous meeting with a panel of Egyptologists, author of Giza Power Plant, Christopher Dunn, brought a slab of granite, a hammer, and a copper chisel, and asked for a demonstration of how Egyptians were supposed to have chiseled out 1,000-ton granite obelisks using simple hand tools. After a few whacks at it, the copper chisel had a deep indent, and not a chip of granite was displaced. Alan Alford wrote, "Chris Dunn found that many artifacts bore the same marks as conventional 20th century machining methods, sawing, lathe, and milling practices. He was particularly interested, however, in the evidence of a modern processing technique known as trepanning. This process is used to excavate a hollow in a block of hard stone by first drilling and then breaking out the remaining core. Petrie had studied both the hollows and the cores and been astonished to find spiral grooves on the core which indicated a drill feed rate of 0.1 inches per revolution of the drill. This initially seemed to be impossible. In 1983, Dunn had ascertained that industrial diamond drills could cut granite with a drill rotation speed of 900 revolutions per minute and a feed rate of 0.0002 inches per revolution. What these technicalities actually mean is that the ancient Egyptians were cutting their granite with a feed rate 500 times greater than 1983 technology. W. M. Petrie wrote, "On the granite core, the spiral of the cut sinks 1 inch in the circumference of 6 inches, a rate of plowing out which is astonishing. These rapid spiral grooves cannot be ascribed to anything but the descent of the drill into the granite under enormous pressure. Graham Hancock wrote, "Wasn't it peculiar that at the supposed dawn of human civilization, more than 4,500 years ago, the ancient Egyptians had acquired what sounded like industrial age drills packing a ton or more of punch and capable of slicking through hard stones like hot knives through butter?" W. M. Petrie wrote, "In the first and second pyramids in Giza, there are granite portcullises in the lower passages which still baffle experts today. Firstly, their complex designs suggest a use much more advanced than deterring robbers, the Egyptologist explanation. It would take about 50 men to lift the portcullis slabs into place, yet the narrow corridors they are positioned into could have only been occupied by a few men at a time. The pyramids also encode high mathematics supposedly unknown to the simple ancient Egyptians. To begin with, the pyramids are located precisely on the 30th degree latitude and aligned to within 3 arc minutes of true north. These are beyond coincidence, so it can be assumed that they could very accurately measure both latitude and longitude. The ratio of the Great Pyramid's height to its base perimeter is exactly pi, 3.14. The King's Chamber and other rooms are perfect golden rectangles, expressing the mystical number of phi, 1.618. The ratio between successive numbers in the Fibonacci sequence increasingly approach phi as you go on from 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34. The resulting graph is known as the fractal golden spiral and looks like a conch shell. Establishment Egyptologists say these mathematical considerations are all coincidence, maintaining that ancient Egyptians didn't possess these concepts. But the reality is, the ancient Egyptians did possess higher math, and they purposely encoded it into their construction. Graham Hancock wrote, "Some routine mathematical games were built into the dimensions of the sarcophagus. For example, it had an internal volume of 1,166.4 liters, and an external volume of exactly twice that, 2,332.8 liters. Such a precise coincidence could not have been arrived at accidentally. The walls of the coffer had been cut to machine age tolerances by craftsmen of enormous skill and experience. In the King's Chamber, the floor diagonal is precisely twice the room's height. W. M. Petrie says, they managed to place the King's Chamber perfectly where the vertical section of the pyramid was halved, where the area of the horizontal section was half that of the base, where the diagonal from corner to corner was equal to the length of the base, and where the width of the face was equal to half the diagonal of the base. Do you suppose these mathematics were accidental? Egyptologists say that the Giza pyramids were built for 3 pharaohs over the course of 100 years. There are over 2.5 million stones, so if you build 24 hours a day for 100 years, that means fitting one average 3.5-ton stone into place every 8.5 minutes. Using current technology, multiple cranes and work crews, we still couldn't make that kind of time, nor could we match the craftsmanship. 6 million tons of stone, underground tunnels, chambers, corridors, 45 and 90-degree shafts, pi and phi ratios, golden rectangles, and other mathematical inclusions, perfect cardinal alignments, right angles, astrological considerations, and flawless masonry. How did ancient man the whole world over build these huge, magnificent pyramids? They stacked stones so heavy, many of which cannot be lifted into place with the technology and machinery available today. They quarried these stones from miles away and fitted them together so seamlessly that you can't fit a blade between them. Also in Egypt, tens of thousands of diorite bowls have been found with hieroglyphs engraved. Diorite is one of the hardest stones on earth, harder than iron, yet intricate inscriptions have been made not through the use of chisels or scraping, but some unknown ancient technology. whatever it was capable of etching lines 1/150th of an inch wide, often in sets of parallel lines separated by a mere 1/30th of an inch. The same kind of workmanship has been found in vases, urns, and other pottery unearthed at the Pyramid of Zoser. Graham Hancock says, "There was no technology known to have been available to the ancient Egyptians capable of achieving such results, nor, for that matter, would any stone carver today be able to match them, even if he were working with the best tungsten carbide tools. The implication, therefore, is that an unknown or secret technology had been put to use in ancient Egypt." The Sphinx, which Egyptologists say is less than 5,000 years old, is actually at least 10,000 years old based on its weathering alone. Geologists confirm that it has been eroded by massive amounts of water which hasn't been present in the Sahara for about 10,000 years. Egyptologists claim this weathering is just wind and sand erosion, but geologists like Robert Schoch find that hard to swallow. Albert Alford wrote, "In October 1991, Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist at Boston University, presented detailed evidence that the Sphinx was thousands of years older than the commonly accepted date of 2500 BC. His conclusion was based on the weathering profile of the limestone rock out of which the Sphinx had been carved. Visitors to the Sphinx today can clearly see the vertical weathering profile in the limestone trench surrounding the Sphinx. This erosion, according to the science of geology, could only be the result of prolonged rainfall, in contrast to the dry weather experienced in Egypt since 2500 BC. Based on the climatic evidence, Schoch estimated that the Sphinx had to be between 9,000 and 12,000 years old when the climate in Egypt was much wetter." Acharya S. wrote, "In fact, although Egypt is often given the honor of being the originator of much human culture, the Egyptians themselves recorded that they were the inheritors of a great civilization that came from elsewhere. Indeed, the Egyptian culture seemingly appeared out of nowhere at a high level of development, as did the Sumero-Mesopotamian and South American. This fact is explainable if the civilizers were advanced groups coming from elsewhere, from lands that had been destroyed by climatic change, war, or other cataclysm. Tlachihualtepetl, the man-made mountain in Mexico, is a ziggurat 3 times the size of the Great Pyramid. The base length of the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan is almost identical in length to the base of the Great Pyramid at Giza. What are those odds? Teotihuacan means the place where men become gods. They claim their pyramids and temples were instruments for transforming the soul after death, exactly as the Egyptians did. This theme is all over the ancient world. Ancient Tibetans, the Egyptians, and Native Americans all had complex systems, multi-stage challenges for recently deceased souls to overcome in the afterlife. Specific stages of the different cultures' afterlife journeys even match up. The Mayans and the Egyptians both believed in stellar rebirth, where kings, pharaohs, and heroes die and are reborn as stars. And Colin Renfrew wrote, "Archaeologists all over the world have realized that much of prehistory, as written in the existing textbooks, is inadequate, some of it, quite simply, wrong. It has been suggested that the changes now at work in prehistory herald the shift to a new paradigm, made necessary by the collapse of the first paradigm." The Noah's Ark flood myth from the Bible was also attributed to Zasudra and Atrahasis in Sumerian and Mesopotamian culture. In Aztec mythology, only Coxcoxtli and his wife Coxaquetzal were forewarned of the flood by God and survived by building a huge boat. They wandered for 104 years before landing in Antlan. The Meco-Acanesics of Central America say Tesbe built a large boat, loaded it with animals, grains, seeds, and escaped the flood with his wife and children. The Maya say the Great Mother and Great Father survived and repopulated the world after the flood. The Chickasaw Native Americans say only one family and 2 animals of every kind were saved from the flood. The same basic story is found in almost 600 cultures around the world. Alan Alford wrote, "From almost every culture around the world there emerge more than 500 strikingly similar legends of a great flood. These legends all share a common theme, of mankind being swept away, with the exception of one man and his family who survived. We in the West generally know the survivor's name as Noah, but to the Aztecs he was Nene, whilst in the Near East he was Atrahasis, Utnapishtim, or Zasudra. As for his means of escape, the Bible describes an ark, or boat. Mesopotamian records describe a submersible vessel, and the Aztec version refers to a hollowed-out log. According to the Aztec legend, men were saved by turning into fish. Ancient texts from the Near East speak of the flood as a major catastrophe, not a local or trivial event, but a great time divider. There are flood myths from the Inuits of Alaska to the Canarians of Ecuador, from the Tupinamba of Brazil and the Araucanians of Chile, to the Pehuenche and Yamana of Tierra del Fuego, from the Sumerians and early Mesopotamians to the Hopi, Iroquois, and Sioux Indians of North America. Thailand, Laos, Australia, Japan, China, Greece, Egypt, India, North, South, and Central America, the story is found all the world over, but the claims are quite difficult to swallow. Is the flood just a story, a myth with metaphorical meaning, or a literal account of worldwide flooding? Michael Tessarian suggests perhaps the greatest myth being purveyed is that myths are just myths. In Japan, the Yonaguni megalith is undoubtedly man-made, yet it has been underwater since at least 8000 BC. It is 8 stories high, 500 feet long, with internal and external right angles, steps, rooms, and the stage altar-like area with huge human faces and headdresses carved into the stone. In the Gulf of Cambay, in northwest India, there are 2 multiple mile-long and wide underwater cities which, taken together, are the size of Manhattan. About 2,000 human fossilized remains have been found in these cities, and have all carbon dated to around 7500 BC. Many underwater ruins have been found off the coast of Cuba, 2,200 feet below sea level. There have been over 200 sunken cities found in the Mediterranean alone. The possibility of a literal flood is not to be scoffed at. Perhaps only the more specific elements of the story are metaphorical. Frank Joseph writes, Plato tells us of an advanced civilization that existed 9,000 years before himself, when the Atlantic was navigable and traversed by people the world over. One of the most revealing details of Timaeus is its mention of the opposite continent, an unmistakable reference to America. Its inclusion proves not only that the ancient Greeks knew what lay on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean 2,000 years before Columbus rediscovered it, but underscores the veracity of Plato's Atlantis account. Plato wrote about an advanced civilization that flourished in Atlantis around 10,000 BC. He even made the point that some take Atlantis to be a myth, but it is absolutely true. He even said when the flood occurred, figuring approximately 9,600 BC. Atlantean-like legends are on every inhabited continent and always include advanced beings, often revered as gods, with high technology and developed culture. Nearly 600 cultures around the world speak about a worldwide flood caused by angry gods that all but wiped out this advanced civilization. Plato wrote, "You do not know that there formerly dwelt in your land the fairest and noblest race of men which ever lived, and that you and your whole city Athens are descended from a seed or remnant of them which survived. The power came forth out of the Atlantic Ocean, for in those days the Atlantic was navigable, and there was an island situated in from the straits, which are by you called the Pillars of Hercules. The island was larger than Libya and Asia put together, and was the way to other islands. Now in this island of Atlantis there was a great and wonderful empire, which had rule over the whole island, and several others, and over parts of the continent, and furthermore the men of Atlantis had subjected the parts of Libya within the columns of Hercules, as far as Egypt, and of Europe as far as Tyrrhenia. It's interesting that King Atlas is said to have ruled Atlantis, an ancient sunken city in the Atlantic Ocean. There is also Mount Atlas in Morocco, and the etymology of Atlas or the Atlantic is indeed from Atlantis. Strangely enough, however, as the Atlantean scholar Commons Beaumont wrote, the word Atlantis possesses no derivation from any known language of the Old World, either ancient or modern, yet among the so-called native races of America it is a living word. The Toltecs, Nahuatlacas, and Aztecs of South America, and all the races that settled Mexico, traced their ancestors back to a starting point called Aztlan, or Atlan, in the Atlantic. It was a land they described as too fair and beautiful to be left willingly, which was lost under the sea after a great flood. Aztec temples are called Teocalli, which interestingly compares with the Greek theos, God, and Callias, house or dwelling of. Europeans first settling in Delaware and Maryland found a river named by the natives Potomac, which is just like the Greek word Potomos, meaning river. The native Basques of Western Europe also claim to be descendants from a continent called Atlantica, which sank beneath the waves. The Basque language itself shares no lingual affinities with any other European language, but is very similar to Native American languages. The natives of Mindanao in the Philippines are the Atas, who have the same flood myth and claim descent from light-skinned invaders who intermarried with the aboriginals. Ignatius Donnelly wrote, "Look at it, an Atlas mountain on the shore of Africa, an Atlan town on the shore of America, the Atlantes living along the north and west coast of Africa, an Aztec people from Aztlan in Central America, an ocean rolling between the two worlds called the Atlantic, a mythical deity called Atlas holding the world on his shoulders, and an immemorial tradition of an island of Atlantis. Can all these things be the result of accident?" With the Atlantic Ocean and the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, we see the theme of water and hills or mountains being equated with Atlas. This is repeated worldwide. In Japan, Atago is a hill in the center of Tokyo where gods brought civilization to Japan. Atagi are the Japanese priests protecting wisdom from free history. In Tongo, Ata Mountain and Memorial are devoted to red-haired, fair-skinned gods who came long ago and blessed the natives. Italy comes from Italia, which comes from Atalia, a word meaning land of Atlas. Atalia is also the name of an ancient ceremonial mound in Biarritz. Across the Atlantic, the Aztecs also venerated a holy mountain by that name. Atalaya is the name of a small Quechua Indian town, and Atalia was a pre-Incan city found by archaeologists and confirmed by local history. In Guatemala, where the Mayan civilization thrived, near Lake Atitlan, is a stone tower called Atalia. The mountains of Indonesian Sumatra are called Atja. The Guanche natives on the Canary Islands call mountains Ataras, and their Atlas figure was named Ater. Tenerite Guanche natives call themselves Atanach, which means people of the sky god. Herodotus, Diodorus, Siculus, and other classical writers described the Antarantes people who lived on the Atlantic shores of Morocco. Atcha is ancient Egyptian for an advanced but sunken city. Egyptian gods or heroes were Atum, Atfi, Athoths, and many other At names. Atchafalaya means long river to the Chacto Indians, whose flood myth sinks. Atea is the Marquesians' ancestral progenitor, like Egypt's Adam. Atea Murray is the site of huge megalithic ruins in New Zealand, which contains At and Mu. Ateu is an extinct volcano in the Cook Islands. The Pawnee Indians, adept at astrology with the usual flood myth, had the sky god Atias. Nahuatl is the Aztecs' language, and almost all their gods' names end in atl. Their Atlas character is Atlantiatl, and Atlantica means "we live by the sea." The Tuareg natives of Morocco's name for water is also Atl. The Tuaregs claim descent from the Atlantes, ancient Moroccans written about by Herodotus, Diodorus, Siculus, and others. Atla was a giantess Norse god. Atlakvith, meaning punishment of Atla, is the name of their written record of their Atlantean oral history. Atlamal is another of these myths, which means the story of Atla. Atla is also an Atomi Indian town in Mexico. The Atomi have a ritual dance called the Acatlaxki, with 10 dancers to represent the 10 kings of Atlantis from the ancient ancestry. The Aztec sea god was Atlahua, and their great flood was Atamotzli. Today's Alca on the Gulf of Uraba was called Atlan before the Spanish conquest. Atlan is the name of a Venezuelan village of Paria Indians who say their home country was a preposterous island in the Atlantic inhabited by wealthy seafarers from which they escaped the flood. Outlan was home of the advanced Tarascans of Michoacan, who say they were inheritors of a drowned island civilization. Atland is the northern European name given to Atlantis, as shown in the medieval Frisian manuscript Oera Lindabach. Atlanersa was the 5th century BC king of Nubia, whose name meant royal descendant of Atlan. Ateo was a Minoan god thought to be Atlas, and later in Crete, Atana was the name of their language and dialect. Aten was the oldest sun deity in Egypt, and Atanatia was the ancient Aztec sun god. Another name for Egypt's sun god was Ra, like Rama of the Hindus, Rana of the Toltecs, Rayam of the Yemen, and the Raymi Peruvian sun festival. Is anyone prepared to accept all this etymology as coincidence? Could there really have been an advanced ancient Atlantean civilization? Could the myth of a sunken island continent be more than a myth? Francis Lenormant wrote, "Upon that part of the African continent nearest to the site of Atlantis, we find a chain of mountains known from the most ancient times as the Atlas Mountains. Whence this name Atlas, if it be not from the name of the great king of Atlantis? And if this be not its origin, how comes it that we find it in the most northwestern corner of Africa? And how does it happen that in the time of Herodotus there dwelt near this mountain chain a people called Atlantes, probably a remnant of a colony from Solon's island? How comes it that the people of the Barbary states were known to the Greeks, Romans, and Carthaginians as the Atlantes, this name being especially applied to the inhabitants of Fezzan and Bilma? Where did they get the name from? There is no etymology for it east of the Atlantic Ocean." Scholar and renowned linguist Charles Berlitz of Berlitz Language Schools spoke 32 languages and wrote many books on Atlantis. He came to believe in Atlantis after his research traced all world languages back to what he thought must be a single ancient dialect. Many famous people have believed in the authenticity of Atlantis. Francis Bacon wrote The New Atlantis. H. G. Wells wrote Men Like Gods about Atlantis. and William Blake the poet was a believer. Two of the best-known prophets in history, Nostradamus and Edgar Cayce, both spoke of Atlantis. Ignatius Donnelly was a Minnesota governor, congressman, and senator who wrote extensively about Atlantis. The most revered and well-known philosopher in history, Plato, wrote about Atlantis, specifically saying it was both a literal story and a myth. Frank Joseph wrote, Iamblichos was an important 4th century Neoplatonist philosopher who insisted upon the historical validity of Plato's Atlantis account, but stressed, as did Plato, its allegorical significance. Silenus told Midas that there was another continent besides the commonly known ones. He said there was a country where gold and silver are so plentiful that they are esteemed no more than we esteem iron. St. Clement, in his epistle to the Corinthians, said there were other worlds beyond the ocean. Diodorus Siculus said that the Phoenicians discovered a large island in the Atlantic Ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules, several days' sail from the coast of Africa. This island abounded in all manner of riches. The soil was exceedingly fertile, the scenery was diversified by rivers, mountains, and forests. It was the custom of inhabitants to retire during the summer to magnificent country houses, which stood in the midst of beautiful gardens. Fish and game were found in great abundance, the climate was delicious, and the trees bore fruit at all seasons of the year. The ancient Greek poet Hesiod described the world before the fall, saying, Man lived like gods, without vices or passions, vexation or toil. In happy companionship with divine beings, they passed their days in tranquility and joy, living together in perfect equality, united by mutual confidence and love. The earth was more beautiful than now, and spontaneously yielded an abundant variety of fruits. Human beings and animals spoke the same language and conversed with each other, telepathy. Men were considered mere boys at 100 years old. They had none of the infirmities of age to trouble them, and when they passed to regions of superior life, it was in gentle slumber. Ignatius Donnelly wrote, The religion of the Atlanteans, as Plato tells us, was pure and simple. They made no regular sacrifices but fruit and flowers. They worshipped the sun. In Peru a single deity was worshipped, and the sun, his most glorious work, was honored as his representative. Quetzalcoatl, the founder of the Aztecs, condemned all sacrifice but that of fruit and flowers. The first religion of Egypt was pure and simple. Its sacrifices were fruit and flowers. Temples were erected to the sun, Ra, throughout Egypt. In Peru, the great festival of the sun was called Rami. The Phoenicians worshipped Baal and Moloch. The one represented the beneficent, and the other the injurious powers of the sun. Homer, Plutarch, and many other ancient writers mention islands situated in the Atlantic, several thousand stadia from the Pillars of Hercules. Pillars, obelisks, and towers have all been shown to have Masonic significance. Hercules performing his 12 labors has been shown to reference the sun, the mushroom, and consciousness in general. So are the Pillars of Hercules real or metaphorical? Is Atlantis real or metaphorical? Is it both? During a chance meeting with a Native American wisdom keeper on a New Mexico hiking trail, author Greg Braden was told the following story. A long time ago, our world was very different from the way we see it today. There were fewer people, and we lived closer to the land. People knew the language of the rain, the crops, and the great Creator. They even knew how to speak to the stars and the sky people. They were aware that life is sacred and comes from the marriage between Mother Earth and Father Sky. In this time, there was balance, and people were happy. Then something happened. No one really knows why, but people started to forget who they were. In their forgetting, they began to feel separate from the earth, from each other, and even from the one who created them. They were lost and wandered through life with no direction or connection. In their separation, they believed that they had to fight to survive in this world, and defend themselves against the same forces that gave them the life they had learned to live in harmony with and trust. Soon, all of their energy was used to protect themselves from the world around them, instead of making peace with the world within them. Even though they had forgotten who they were, somewhere inside of them, the gift of their ancestors remained. There was still a memory that lived within them. In their dreams at night, they knew that they held the power to heal their bodies, bring rain when they needed to, and speak with their ancestors. They knew that somehow they could find their place in the natural world once again. As they tried to remember who they were, they began to build the things outside of their bodies that reminded them of who they were on the inside. As time went on, they even built machines to do their healing, made chemicals to grow their crops, and stretched wires to communicate over long distances. The farther away they wandered from their inner power, the more cluttered their outer lives became with the things that they believed would make them happy. No one knows how the story ends, because it isn't finished. The people who got lost are our ancestors, and we are the ones who are writing the ending.